This is a 2016 BMW M3 and comes with sport suspension from the factory. But if you're looking for that extra low, 1 inch up front and 3/4 in the back to be exact, then this video will show you how to install lowering springs. We'll be using a set of Mach Schnell lowering springs. These are compatible with the factory M adaptive suspension and are the same gloss black as the stock BMW springs. Start by loosening your wheel bolts with a breaker bar and 17mm socket. Newer BMWs have special jack points for which you will need a specifically designed jack pad. We are using 2 jacks to evenly lift the front of the vehicle. Place the jack stand under the center jack point and carefully lower your car. Keep both jacks in place for additional stability and safety. For safety reasons, we will also disconnect the battery. Begin by carefully removing the EDC sensor connector from the upper strut's rubber pad. Carefully pry off the plastic clips holding the pad in place. Next, carefully pry off the top cap and disconnect the sensor. These plastic covers are held on by 3 plastic bolts on each side of the engine bay. Turn them 90 degrees to unlock. Repeat the same steps for the passenger side to remove the rubber cap, EDC sensor, and plastic cover. Carefully remove the bolts holding the carbon fiber brace in place. Also pay attention to the smaller hidden 10mm bolt attached to the coolant reservoir. Remove the carbon fiber brace and find a safe place to store it. Remove the cable for the acceleration sensor and store it out of the way. Next, loosen the pinch bolt holding the strut to the carrier. At this point, the brake hose bracket should be free and can be moved out of the way. To disconnect the sway bar end link, first loosen the upper sway bar end link nut with a 16mm socket. Then remove it by using a Torx bit and 16mm wrench. On the driver's side, remember to disconnect the headlight leveling arm. Place a jack under the carrier assembly, being careful not to bend or damage the brake dust shield. It's now safe to remove the top strut mount bolts. There should be 7 in total holding it in place, from which 3 are for the strut bar. At this point, the strut assembly should be removable. Carefully lower the jack and swing the strut assembly out from underneath the fender. Using a small pry bar, open the carrier to release the strut assembly. To reduce stress on the components, use the jack to lift the carrier back into place and secure it with wire or cords. Using spring compressors, compress the springs enough to take the load off the top strut mount. Remove the top nut and disassemble the strut assembly. Install the new lowering spring and rubber dust boot. When installing the top spring mount, make sure all your rubber pads are properly seated on the spring. Torque the top strut mount to spec. Before reassembling the driver's side, you will have to remove the front strut bar in order to access 2 of the Torx bolts on the passenger side. Go ahead and remove the strut bar now. There will be 2 more bolts at the center of the strut bar that need to be removed. Safely store your strut bar, preferably using the same individual who is still holding your carbon fiber brace. From here, the passenger side disassembly is almost identical, with the exception that there is no headlight leveling sensor. Complete the passenger side spring install at this time. Carefully drop your driver's side carrier back down so you can slide the strut assembly back in. Be very careful not to stretch or damage any of the lines or wires. Slowly jack the entire assembly up and realign all the top strut mount holes. Hand tighten all your top mount bolts and then torque them to spec. Realign your brake hose bracket and install your pinch bolt, which connects the carrier and strut assembly. Then torque to spec. Reinstall the sway bar end link mount and reconnect your acceleration sensor. Finally, reattach your headlight leveling sensor. Remove the jack holding the assembly in place. Reinstall your strut bar, torquing the bolts to spec. Carefully reinstall your carbon fiber brace. Remember the 10mm bolt which attaches to your coolant reservoir. Reinstall your plastic covers and turn the 3 plastic bolts on each side 90 degrees to lock them back into place. Your EDC sensor plugs back into the top strut mount the same way it unplugged. Once you have reinstalled your rubber mount covers, push the plastic clips back into place. When installing spacers, remember to clean the surface area and apply some anti-seize. Let your car down evenly and torque your wheel bolts to spec.
3, 2, 1, go.
It's now time for the rear. Chock your front wheels and loosen your rear wheel bolts. Once again, evenly jack up the rear of the vehicle and place 2 jack stands on the appropriate jack points. Loosen your bottom strut mount and mark your camber adjustment bolt so you can reset it later. Place a jack for support under your control arm, then remove your camber adjustment bolt. Before lowering the rear control arm, make sure to disconnect your headlight level sensor on the driver's side. The lower control arm should now push out of the way with a little bit of force, enabling you to remove the rear spring. Remove the top and bottom spring cups. Since this is an M3, we need to install additional spring spacers, but this is not the case for the M4. See the manufacturer's instructions for further details. Make sure the spring seats are properly aligned and reinstall your spring. Jack the lower control arm back up and insert your camber adjustment bolt. Realign to your previously marked location. Install your lower strut mount bolt and torque both bolts to spec. Congratulations, you've successfully lowered your M3 or M4. Sit back, enjoy the view, or go drive it and enjoy the improved handling.